So now the participants joining the room, we'll give them a few seconds so that everyone can follow us directly from the beginning. See, it's still some new joiners. So I would like to welcome you all. That's if I'm counting right, the third webinar out of our series Mastering Compliance, Governance, and Anti-Financial Crime. The third one that we do on the overall risk and compliance management program. And today's webinar is about how to effectively get to a regulatory gap analysis and how to build an adaptive risk and compliance management program. I'm still trying to figure out how to move the slide. So I would like to welcome you. My name is Dirk Findeisen. I'm managing partner with MSG Rethink Compliance. And today's session, my colleague Khan Nguyen will help us to make it more interactive and to also bring you later in regards to some polls where we would like you to provide us your opinions as well. I'm coming to that one as well in a few minutes. MSG, you might not heard about MSG so far. It's a family-owned group of companies with more than 10,000 employees in 32 countries. Within the German-speaking countries, we are on the top 4 ranked consultancies. We are not only delivering advisory and consulting services, but also some products in over 12 key industries. Main one is banking and insurance, and we have a turnover in 2023 for approximately 1.4 billion. That's preliminary results 2023. MSG Rethink Compliance, that's where Khan and me are coming from, are the experts on anti-financial crime within the group. So our focus is on AML, counter-terrorism financing, sanctions, KYC, fraud, and anti-bribery and corruption. That's just to give you an idea about us. From a logistics perspective for this webinar, you are muted. That means if you have questions, please use the Q&A button that should be available to you and just write your questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and we will go through the questions then as best as possible. If you think you would like to ask your questions in a more private way, of course, you can send them to us via email. That's info@msg-compliance.com. We will then also answer as soon as possible to your questions. As already mentioned, we would like to have an interactive session. That means we are also asking you some questions. Therefore, we use Mentimeter. You can either use menti.com using the poll code that is given on this slide, or you just screen with your mobile phone the QR code, and you will directly be linked to the polling site. We will also provide this slide when we starting the poll. So far, it's just for your information and just to get familiar with the logistics. The ones who are attending our webinars also in the past knows that we always come with 4 chapters in our webinars. The 5th one is the Q&A one. As today's webinar is about how to build an effective regulatory gap analysis. and an adaptive risk and compliance management system. We would just introduce you to the factors that we see for optimization. Then we would go into the essential components and techniques, provide you some prerequisites, technical requirements, and finally provide some practical use cases to just provide you a sort of motivation, what you can do, what you can reach quite easily. We call it the low-hanging fruits, but I'm coming to this one soon. So let's start with the first chapter, and the one or the other might remind this slide already from one of the last webinars, where we had the maturity model, and typically those maturity models are starting with an ad hoc level and ending with an adaptive level. Adaptive always means always includes all the other maturity levels. But to bring it down, it's really how to react on internal or external impacts with your risk and compliance management program. And typically adaptive means to somehow automatically adapt to those changes. So a sort of automation, and we will come to this automation later on, as well as I can just give you a little bit upfront information. You will find the different types of automation in a similar way as we provided here in the maturity model. So it's about how to build an adaptive risk compliance management system and using automation. And the rationale behind that one is to come to the right level of productivity when you span the room between effectivity and effectiveness on the one side, and your procedures and controls framework on the other side. If you do less, you risk you're risking fines and penalties. It's a sort of a laissez-faire management style then in your full program, so you need to improve. On the other side, if you do far too much, you become rigid, you come into a bureaucratic mode, typically seen when it takes you more than 3 months to onboard a legal entity in average, by the way. It's not about specifically or special legal entities where you have to do a lot of work, but it still works too long. So that's one indicator that you might tend to be over-engineered here. Optimum is always a problem from a mathematical perspective. To optimize something, you need to know the optimum. Whether we are able to identify the optimum in each specific organization, I leave it with you. But nevertheless, we can easily agree that you have to come into a sort of an optimum, and that's the level where, or that's the area where the level of productivity within your first, second, and third line of defense is at its peak. So that's the rationale behind this automation. That's the rationale behind to build an adaptive system. And the reason why you would like to build is because everything is connected. And if you would like to have it adapted as an overall system, you also need to connect those dots by using the specific data points, because you have the regulatory change, and there is nothing more stable as the all over changing regulation. And if the regulation change, you would like to get an idea about what do I need to do, what do I need to adapt in my policy, procedure, and controls framework. So this gap identification plays a role, and we come to this one later. But also, if you have your policies and procedures management and your controls under control, It's also about identifying redundancies, identifying uh, inconsistencies, because typically the way you grow your procedures and management framework, controls framework, comes also from a sort of a siloed approach in the past. So it's historically grown. And of course, your procedures and controls are your standards. They are linked to the risk assessments, because within the risk assessment, you have your risk or assessment objects. You define the risk, you define your mitigation strategies, and you need to understand whether your mitigation strategies are effective or not. And they are linked to the controls, obviously. So if you put this all together on the data, then you can reach a sort of an adaptive system. And one idea on how to optimize or right size the system is, for example, streamlining your controls framework in an automatic, continuous way. So if you look just, for example, as per today, you have your internal control system, you have your documentation, you need to update your documentation, you need to test the controls, you need to evaluate the control status, you have to get your external audits done. Also, the internal audits needs to get through the controls as well. And you can easily somehow say the ones on the top are directly related to compliance costs, whereas the ones on the bottom are more control and process costs, if you would like to distinguish them this way. So the first level of automated assessing or assessments would be that you don't touch the internal control system. You really think about the controls, the amount of controls, the quality of the controls that you have, and you can bring it typically down. And if you bring that down, you save external audit fees, you're saving in the testing and evaluation of those controls, and of course also on the documentation. And then you go into a continuous way of improving, and that's all about automation, by the way. You go into a continuous cycle, and that would now touch also the internal control system at its own way, and you can achieve, you can stay with the savings you have and ensure that even if your whole business is moving, even if the regulation is changing, you can keep your controls on that level you have, and just improve or optimize your internal control system. And by saying that one, our experiences on the customer side are about saving potentials of roughly 30% over 2 to 3 years. That's one example out of this potential that you have if you set up your controls environment, if you set up your policy and procedures in an adaptive way and use automation to enable you to increase your efficiency. By increasing your efficiency, by the way, you are also increasing the productivity, especially if it comes to the first line of defense, for example. So now I'm handing over to Khan. She will lead you through the first poll, and I would be delighted if all of you are joining this poll and providing us your ideas, your thoughts, as that might impact also the next few minutes of our webinar. Thank you up front, and handing over to you, Khan.
Thank you, Dirk. So I will switch now over to the Mentimeter presentation. In the chat, you will also find a direct link, so don't panic if I switch now to Mentimeter. So I will wait some seconds for all of you to join. So it would be really great if we have large numbers of participants. I think the results will also bring some insights for you as well. And in a couple of seconds, we will start with the first question. All right. Great. So then let's jump to the first one. So we just talked about optimization, and that's why we are interested in knowing what you see as the highest potential for optimization, of course, within your organization. And we have listed some of the areas that we also touched during the last chapter. And yeah, please rank them, of course, with the highest potential first, and then we will see what we have as a result. So I think 2 days ago we did this webinar in Germany, and then I'm curious about whether the results are comparable to that one. Okay, so we still
Looks a
have
little bit
some
that way.
progress. Yeah, at least for the number one, I
Yeah.
can remember.
And there might be a change coming soon if it's developing the same way as we had it the beginning of the week. But also here you see that from a monitoring system and screening systems, as there was already a lot of work done over the last 10 years to get this false positive channel under control. I'm not really surprised that the other topics are ranking higher. So the regulatory change management seems to lead. That's the same thing as we had in the past. And there is still a movement, still some movement, but I would say in second place is policy and procedure management, and then followed by the risk assessment. So that's also interesting. Or maybe it's a little bit ahead of the controls framework. So it's interesting. Thanks for participating in this poll. I guess that's an interesting topic, and of course, we will provide you an idea about how to handle the regulatory change management, because that's where we talk about the regulatory gap in a few minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please leave your window open. We will come back to that presentation, and then we can continue later on with some more questions. So now let's switch back to our presentation, and then we can continue with the next chapter.
Yeah, and to provide you a little bit of change, Karen, you will go through this chapter.
Yes, that's
cool.
That's
Thank
correct.
you.
Thank you. So yeah, on the next one, we would like to touch a little bit on the gap analysis itself. So we want to look briefly into the components and maybe some techniques, how you can most effectively create a gap analysis. So I would like to walk you through a process flow and begin with the identification actually of new regulatory changes. So what we of course would always recommend is to have technology support processes, since the process or the step of monitoring regulatory changes can be quite time consuming. So with, for example, a web crawler that can does the work for you during night, you can save some time, and you will always stay up to date on any regulatory changes. So, but for the gap analysis, the first step would be the regulatory requirements breakdown, what we call it. So we need to build a foundation, a base for the gap analysis. So it is really important to break down especially complex regulatory changes, requirements into more smaller pieces that is on a granular level that you can compare later on with your internal controls, your internal policies. So that would be an important first step. And you can use either a structure that is similar to how you structure your policies and procedures yourself. So that is also easier later on to compare these two sides. So here we have as an example, a repository where you store your regulations, and a breakdown into separate obligations out of these regulatories, also structured within a repository. So that would be an important first step. Next one is to look into your current state. So the evaluation of your internal policies, controls, procedures. And to have an effective gap analysis, it's also vital to have a very well documented internal landscape, so that you have all the information you need to compare them with the extracted regulatory obligations and requirements. So when you use, for example, process mapping as a technique, you can start with mapping obligations, requirements to these processes, which later on help you to better map them to your current internal control landscape. So let's have a look at the gap analysis itself. After we have these two perspectives, external and internal, we can perform the identification of gaps between these two sides. And it is, I think, important to have categories as a result out of the gap analysis, because actually it's part of an impact analysis, of course, as well. So you will want to know what are obligations, requirements that you have already implemented, and which obligations, requirements are still missing in your internal control system. So that's why a categorization within the gap analysis is very helpful. And the next step would be to bring in your risk assessment results. Of course, not all the deficiencies that you have identified need to be mitigated right away. You don't, I guess, you don't have the resource to touch and address all of the issues at once. So a prioritization is key. And then, of course, you can bring in your risk assessment results with, here, and then prioritize the deficiencies that you have identified. According to the priority, a gap analysis should also have, or should be followed by recommendations for actions, for mitigation procedures that you need or should take. And the more detailed these actions are, the better and the more efficient you can be afterwards. Here, as an example, you can get, for example, a concrete internal policy which is listed, and you get a recommendation of what content needs to be updated within that specific policy. So then you have everything documented in one place, and everything is prepared for the very last step, which is the implementation and enforcement of these new rules that are deriving from new regulations. And here, this is just like the main step. You might also know from your own organization. First of all, you need to update the policies, the procedure, documentation, etc., and then distribute them into the organization. And if you are in a group, company group settings, you need to distribute these to the relevant group entities as well. Maybe you will have to have a local review cycle in order to get local regulations being reflected as well. So there might be some additions or even contradictory rules that need to be reflected, documented, approved, etc. And then after that, you can adjust everything, and at the very last step to implement and get these new policies effective. So that's a quick overview of what we're seeing is important for a gap analysis, what you need to consider, what you need to prepare. Yeah, hope that was also, yeah, bring you a little bit more insight and maybe ideas for your own process. And yeah, I would like then to hand over to Dirk again to the next chapter. Dirk.
Yes, great. Thanks, Khan. So the next one is about the technical requirements and automation. So first of all, I would like to introduce you to a typology that comes from Gartner Group on automation. As you can see, it's from 2019, where the whole automation hype was starting. And as mentioned in the beginning, when we saw the maturity matrix, you can see here it starts with an ad hoc automation and it ends with an adaptive automation. So it's very close to the maturity matrix that we saw before. So if I would be able to see all of you, I would ask you who is working with Excel and knows Excel quite well, because the most common sample for an ad hoc automation is a macro. So if you know that you need to do some process steps not only once, but you will need to go through it more frequently, you have the opportunity within Excel to just record your steps. So that later on you just can reply the recording, and Excel is automatically following up on your data. It's typically used for data manipulation in a positive sense. You might also have heard about RPA. RPA stands for Robotic Process Automation. RPA, first of all, has nothing to do with AI. You can combine RPA with AI, but RPA is an own bridging technology that you can use if you have different systems that have no API where you can do a data to data integration. But you need to jump over the UI activities and automate your UI activities. It's a little bit like the Excel macro, but whereas the Excel macros only work within Excel, an RPA recording can work over many applications, and it's recording at the end your UI activities, and then is able to automate all those tasks later on. The functional automation, some of you might already have this in use if they have a newer version of an AML monitoring system, for example, where you get some automated support by the machine, and you just have to fill in some conditions. So by those conditions, the machine is doing this and that in an automated way for you, running through a checklist or whatsoever. For some applications that's already available, or at least you have an ability to build it your own within this application in a low, or in most cases no code way. An integrated automation is then an integration and automation between multiple applications via APIs. It already starts with getting AI injections here. Whereas if you go through an adaptive automation, you will use Gen AI, so the newest technologies that comes out of the AI labs to get your automation done. And why you need AI? Because it's it requires more fuzziness. So whereas the ad hoc automation or the limited automation is really following step by step those processes and is exactly doing whatever you did before while recording. And it only works if the data that you would like to work the macro on or the recording on comes in the same way as it came in when you recorded the automated session. If there is something different, your automation will stop. It will not work anymore. Whereas within the adaptive automation, you would like to enable this fuzziness and have the machine reacting to this kind of different inputs, but still working on this automated topics. If you use it within your risk and compliance framework, you are fine. But unfortunately, that's not only your own decision, it's also about the regulator. So now my system had an issue, sorry. So, and if you look on the regulator for the ad hoc automation, I would say till the functional automation, you just need to provide a documentation, which is typically called a model governance report or similar, so that a knowledgeable third party can understand on how you use this automation. Whereas it goes when it goes more into the advanced levels of automation, where you have machine learning or AI functionalities included, then it's not only about the model governance. It typically that's changing and different from regulator to regulator, to be honest. So we have to look on the specific requirements of each regulator at the moment. They typically tell you we need to have a human decision maker in the loop. So the overall topic here is put the human in the loop. But nevertheless, you are in all the cases able to automate to a certain degree. And some use cases that I would like to share with you is from a limited automation where you typically can use RPA, for example, is the FIU reporting. If you have a SAR, if you have to file a SAR, if you have to file an STR, and you are not able to have a fully automated flow between your system and, for example, the Go AML system on the FIU side, you can just automate the activities and record the session based on your case management system, going to the Go AML portal from the FIU, and filling in all the information that you had in your case management system into those forms on the FIU side, and you can fully automate this with an RPA, for example. If you go more into the details of a case investigation, because you know that your case investigations are following a sort of a checklist approach, you can have the machines providing you all those steps up front, and then you as a case manager, you just make up your mind on what the investigation status is already provided to you, and then make the decision whether it's a true positive, false positive, or whether you need to file a SAR or STR or whatsoever. That's also a stage before possible for decision disposition. So you have all your alerts, and typically you can ask the machine then, okay, just prepare me the decision. What's your opinion about this alert? Is there a suspicious situation that I need to deep dive in, or is it based on, for example, poor data quality or whatsoever? This kind of natural language provided decision support makes it really easy then for your alert case managers to make the decision. And of course, you already have it done for the documentation. And as you know, it's about natural language generation and natural language processing. We are now entering more and more into the field of Gen AI and large language models that you can use for the legal change process, for understanding your procedures and analyzing your procedures. And it's the same thing for the so-called compliance check that Khan already presented in theory a few minutes before. So by saying that one, there are plenty more use cases, but space on my slide is limited. Nevertheless, we would like to get your opinion once more. That's the last poll for today's session, and I'm again handing over to you, Khan. Khan? Ah, yeah, you are
Yeah,
muted,
I'm
by the way.
muted. Yes, sorry. Thank you. So I just switched to Mentimeter, and then we can already continue with the next question. So you just seen these different types of automation. So what we are interested in now is the highest automation level within your organization. So we are very much interested on which field. So please just pin on the area where you see yourself. And then we will see what results we have for that question. Right? So we have already some questions. I mean, it's not that clear, at least comparing to our last webinar, wider spread.
It's a little bit wider spread, that's right. But it still follows the same pattern, I would say. We have more functional automation. So obviously there's more modern technology in place already. That's good for sure. But you also see a very big grouping around the limited automation, the RPA automation, which is, I would say, typically. So I'm not sure whether we have participants here in the webinar who listened to my talk within the TCI conference. I mentioned that typically what we found at our customer side when we start working with them is that the automation level is in between limited and functional. And we then bring them to adaptive automation. So it's, yeah, from my perspective, the pattern is similar to the one beginning of the week. But yeah, it's definitely more widespread.
Yeah. Thank you. So we have another very short one related to that question. So which of the following use cases have already been automated at your organization? So you just mentioned the highest automation level, and now we're interested in these use cases for which you have already done these automation. So of course, we just have some examples here. Hope you can find your own use cases from that list. And let's see the responses coming in. I mean, at the moment, it matches with our very first question that legal change is not yet automated. And it was voted for the highest potential for optimization. So at least that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Just thinking, just trying to remember this slide to the beginning, to the one beginning of the week. I'm not really sure, but it looks like also quite similar. I guess what you see here is that the compliance check and the procedures and controls optimization are equal. That was a little bit different beginning of the week. But that's cool because that would mean you get something, some food for thoughts out of this webinar, because we addressed the compliance check and we addressed the procedure and control optimization to a limited degree, of course, given the time. And I would say if we go to the practical use cases, we will provide you how a compliance check can look like. Am I right, Khan?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, we will have a look into that example.
Oh,
yeah.
cool. So then everyone should get some important information on how to get a better automation done. That's great. Thanks, Khan.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
to
you.
everyone joining the poll.
Yes, thank you very much. So then let's move to our very last chapter, which is the practical use cases that we would like to provide you with. And yeah, this is the stress on example. Of course, there are different ways to automate the legal change management process. So now let's dive into the example that we have prepared for today. So we will have a look at a gap analysis that we will create with AI technology after we have identified a new regulation. And then also what comes after that is the automation of a policy and procedure update, or how it can look. So let me start with the practical use case. So what you see here is the dashboard, the landing page of an application supporting with the legal change management process. So we have a web crawler that will monitor and download all the relevant regulatory documents, information from the relevant websites, and those documents will be updated and uploaded into our so-called regulatory and obligation repository. But before we go into that one, I would like to show you the internal part of the gap analysis, which is the internal policy repository. So that is a very simple example of how you can structure your policies for AFC topics. And here, specifically for AML and CTF, you have at least these a group AML, a general policy, and maybe KYC, due diligence, and of course many other policies for that topic. So now, since you have all the policies, relevant policies of your organization within that platform, you can now have a look at the external regulation. So all new documents will be uploaded and you will get notifications. So in our example, we just picked like the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020, from the US, the AMLA 2020. And this comes together with the Corporate Transparency Act, which is part of the AMLA 2020. And now it's been uploaded and analyzed by an AI doc analyzer. So what we can see is that all the relevant information from those new regulations are being automatically extracted and presented. So we will have a look at that one. And now for us is the key question is, how do we or how much do we need to do to implement all these new regulations? So that's why we perform a so-called implementation status check, which means I would like to know the implementation status of the different regulations. So since we says in terms of when we use AI generative AI here in that case, we might need a human in the loop. So that's why the results from this gap analysis needs to be reviewed by a user. So that's why we're entering the detailed page of this new regulation. And we will see all these meta information, summaries, key information that that help you to get a quick overview of the content of the new regulation. Of course, you will always have the source document for your reference. And all these information are generated by an AI doc analyzer and have been validated also by a human, by a user. And then next to these meta information, you have the so-called related obligations. So we mentioned in the beginning, it is vital to have this breakdown of the regulation, of course. So it will enable you to work with these broken down obligations, pieces of requirements. And here are some examples out of the EMLA 2020 with different regulations. So now on the implementation check part, you will see all these obligations again, but with a status for the implementation. This means we either have a fully implemented obligation, for example, the enhanced information sharing, or you have partly implemented or not implemented at the moment, for example. So to help you to review these results, you will have the related policies, internal policies, and the internal obligations out of these policies here listed next to these obligations. Here to the policies, you can also find the specific obligations out of the policy that are relevant or related to that specific regulation. And then you can start with the review process. So let's have a look at this, this obligation. So this is the AML program modernization, and this has been mapped to these two policies. You can review and see what the results of the gap analysis is. So initial status results is a fully implementation, and then you can confirm or reject this result. And in this case, we confirm it and save. This means the initial result from the gap analysis is also validated by a human being. For the next example, the verification of beneficial ownership with the FinCEN's database. With the AMLA 2020, the FinCEN's database has been introduced in order to get all the information from beneficial owner of legal entities in the US. And that's why this is new, and we expect that regulation is or requirement is not being implemented yet. So the current KYC policy of the organization contains, of course, standard requirements. And now let's look into this review process. It says already it's partly implemented because it couldn't find the content of that obligation in your internal policies. And then, of course, you can confirm. And what what is very helpful here is, and we are talking about automation, is that you get an auto-generated action items and mitigation action item for that partly implemented status. And so let's have a look. It says, okay, you need to update your KYC policy in order to reflect this new requirement regarding this FinCEN database. It will enter some meta information for the management itself of this action. You can keep it to monitor, to track the status, provide an owner or due date, etc. And in our example, we have linked our legal change management system with an internal policy and procedure management tool, which enables us to have an automation on that part as well. So we not only give a recommendation, we also automate that process. So now here is the link to the PPM, which is the Policy and Procedure Management module, and then we can directly go to the other application system, and there is a task already been created for that specific action, which says to update the policy for the KYC policy. And of course, the KYC policy already existed. That's why it's also stored within that PPM. So now let's have a look. We have some meta information from the current KYC policy. Everything that's been updated automatically are marked so that you are aware of the changes that have been automatically being added. And you can, of course, adjust some information that is required, for example, the validation date, the link to the document, and then you can continue. Here are some more scope related content of that policy and the regulation. You can either change it or leave it if nothing needs to be changed. So you have a list of group entities that need to implement this KYC policy. So we have the in-scope entities that is relevant later on for the distribution process. And now let's continue with the next step. So each policy consists of more like detailed, more concrete procedures that are on a operational level. And the KYC policy consists of, here in our example, 4 different procedures. And one of those is the beneficial ownership identification procedure that is also marked as being updated. So now let's have a look of that specific one, and then we can continue to the next step. So in our case, the procedure is presented in as a matrix to reflect all the rules that are written down in that policy. So that is a structured and a very detailed documentation level so that you are able to compare these with the regulations that are coming in. And the system is then being able to provide you with concrete recommendations of what need to be changed. So here the content of that matrix is the different verification sources for the beneficial owner information during onboarding or during monitoring. And you can set the rules for your organization where you first line of defense, for example, when the employees onboard a new customer, where they need to verify these information. So you can set here different sources, and the system has automatically added a new source for you here, which is the FinCEN database where BO informations are stored. And then you can, of course, do some more manual changes if required, but also to just accept the recommendation from the system. Important is not to override the existing policy, of course, and then you can save it under a new version, which is important for the audit trail. And you see you have a version 1.0, which is outdated if you then want to implement and publish the new version of the KYC policy. So next step would be the distribution process. And now let's just quickly go back to the legal change management. Since we have that interface between these two systems, we can automatically track the status of the action, so the mitigation task, which is then is completed. So all the related tasks are completed, and the status of the implementation for that specific application will change to fully implemented. So that is a very high level of automation And this could save you a lot of time if you have the base to integrate such a system. You need the data, of course, and then everything being prepared, and then you can get a very efficient process for that specific legal change management part.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Khan. And what you saw here, you saw the integration between the two components with the, let's say, automated handover of a task that you can follow up, and on the other side, the adaptive automation in working on the documents, in working with the text, with the context of those topics. Given by the AI functionality. So I think that's a impressive showcase on how to get this kind of an automation done. I'm sure we have 5 minutes till the end to our official webinar. I'm not sure whether there are any questions on your side. Please feel free, type into the Q&A part of this session. If you want us to get your questions by email, you can just send us emails at info@msg-compliance.com, and we will work on them as well. And of course, even if we are at the end of this webinar, the next webinars are coming soon, so stay tuned. You will find the information on our website. So the next one will be about risk assessment. So we're following up on the risk assessment strategies. And of course, we will have some more interesting events and news on our website. So please follow up on our website as well. So still no questions. Thank you all for spending your time on those topics. Hopefully everyone was getting some food for thoughts out of this webinar today. Thanks for being with us and have a nice day, and all the best for fighting financial crime. Thank you all.
Thank you all.